Hello and good evening. I'm the Reverend Justin Crisp. I'm the Associate Rector and Theologian in Residence at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. And we're so delighted that you've all joined us here for night 2 of our class, Listen, Learn, and Love, How to Disagree Well in a Polarized World. For any of you just joining us this week, our instructor is Dr. Jewelle Bickel. Dr. Bickel is, or as Dr. J, as she's known around St. Mark's, Dr. J is a lecturer in the humanities at both SUNY Westchester Community College and Mercy College in New York. And she received her PhD in philosophy from the University of Oklahoma. She's a philosopher by training and wrote her dissertation on disagreement and how to do so virtuously. Tonight's broadcast is live, actually, both here on Zoom and also on Facebook. So if you're watching us on Facebook Live, we're delighted that you're joining us through there. Our format will be the same as it was last week. We'll have 30 minutes of presentation from Dr. J, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. The idea is that we're right here at the dinner hour, so you can go immediately from this class to dinner, and you can put some of what you've learned in tonight's class into practice. Each week does have some quote-unquote homework, some activities for you to do to help you to cultivate more intellectual virtue with regard to disagreement. And you will have an opportunity tonight to share with Dr. J some of how last week's homework went if you joined us last week. There will be an opportunity to do that on Menti, and Dr. J will she'll address some of your feedback in a summary way during her presentation. Speaking of Menti, so Dr. Bickel will be using Menti again tonight. This is a presentation platform. It allows for her to aggregate feedback from you live, and it's actually loads of fun. Okay, so if you're on Zoom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link in the chat, and you can just click the link and you'll go right to Menti. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, I'm also going to put the link on Facebook as a comment in the Facebook Live in the window there. You can also go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and type in the code 662899, which I've also just put in the chat here, 662899. It might be easier if you could go to Menti on your phone or on an iPad or a second device so that you can have Zoom running on one device and Menti on the other. Because you'll be following along with the presentation live, and you can give Dr. J feedback live. I believe actually that that's all that I have by way of introduction. Just one more word here, that if you have not yet signed up on our website for the next 2 classes, please do go ahead and do so. There's a new event and a new registration for each class that just helps us to keep track of who's coming to each class. And we also communicate with the folks who attend each class separately. So there's a different mailing list for tonight than there was last week. There will be a different mailing list for next week than there is this week, and so on. If you have any trouble at all registering for any future class, please be in touch with Beth Ralston here at St. Mark's. Our phone number is 203-966-4515, or you can get in touch with Beth via our website. Just shoot her an email and she'll be happy to help. Without further ado, I'd hand it over to Dr. J. Jewel?
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Just, say great. Excellent. All right. It's really great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us again. And if you're new, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. So just a quick recap, like a week's a really long time, right? So we're just going to remind ourselves where we were. We spent last week thinking about what it means to disagree well and how to have intellectual humility. And I'm going to check in with you guys, as Justin said, in a few minutes about your homework. So hold on to that. I want to know. Okay, let me make sure. I think I forgot to put the screen up. Fabulous. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about what it means to disagree well. I get it. I know it's weird for me to encourage you guys to disagree well. Usually, besides like philosophers and reality TV hosts, nobody's like, disagree, right? We all want everyone to get along. But we live in a world in which we're just not going to get along with everybody. And rather than sort of running away or hiding, I want you guys to be able to engage in these conversations in a meaningful way. That's why we want to disagree well. It's not about winning, okay? It's not about picking every single fight you can find. Neither one of those things is necessarily going to be disagreeing well. And also, disagreeing well is not necessarily just being able to agree to disagree, right? It is agreeing to disagree. It's just one step further. It's agreeing to disagree and discussing your disagreements together, working together to seek the truth. So last week, we talked about intellectual humility. This is the part where I want to hear how it went. So intellectual humility, like intellectual fortitude, which we get to talk about tonight, is a virtue, right? So moral virtues are characters of habit that we develop to help us get to the right action. Instead, intellectual virtues help us to get to the truth, right? We're always truth seeking. Now, intellectual humility is both sort of having the right belief about yourself and your limitations and acting in accordance with that, right? I can't go around knowing that I don't know anything about golf and yet still getting upset when people don't listen to my beliefs about golf. So for last week, I gave you guys a couple different assignments. I asked you to think about an exemplar, someone that you know who really is an excellent example of intellectual humility. Perhaps they're very good at sort of adjusting their beliefs if someone shows them, you've been wrong on this. I also asked you to think about a time you were wrong in an argument. I'm sure it was fun, but to think about what role intellectual humility could have played in helping you in that argument. And finally, I asked you to practice disagreeing with someone. And I asked you to sort of think about, how much do you know about the topic? How are you acting with how well you know the topic? And moreover, are you, assuming that you know what this other person's position is, even really when you don't? It looks like we got our first sort of response about the homework, which was saying, regretted the ways you've acted out of sync with your expertise and knowledge. It's hard to come up with exemplars because so many people think that disagreeing well means to agreeing to disagree. That's fair enough. I understand that. Took some thinking, but in the end was helpful. On the plus side, we both agree on the same person being a good example of intellectual humility. That's a great start. Agreeing on the same person is a fabulous way to move towards intellectual humility because you can see what they do and try to practice it in the same way. Okay, we'll come back to this maybe at the end in Q&A. So, intellectual fortitude. What is intellectual fortitude? I want to get an idea from you guys. So go ahead and type in some words and we'll see which words are more, what everyone seems to think versus, whatnot. So let me tell you a quick story. I took my first philosophy class when I was in high school. Okay, first philosophy class. I loved it. It was amazing. Of course I loved it. That's who I am, right? I loved all the questions. I loved all the conversations. It was great. What I didn't love was figuring out what was true. I can still picture myself sitting in that corner desk. One person on one side would say, da, 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 this is true. And I think, they're right. And the person on the other side would say, this is true. And I think, they're right. It didn't matter what the issue was. From bowling to God, I'd go back and forth and sway all around, depending on whatever was said in the classroom. Now, if we hadn't just talked about intellectual humility last week, you guys might be deluded into thinking that was intellectual humility, but it wasn't. I was just acting without intellectual fortitude, okay? I was so afraid to be wrong that I wasn't willing to risk being right. So instead, my beliefs just sort of shifted around me and I lacked common ground. Fortitude, right? As we've got, you guys have already saying perseverance, determination, staying with the position, knowing what you want, confidence, endurance, supported. These are all fabulous. So fortitude, right, is usually courage in facing adversity, which means intellectual fortitude is about sort of preserving your beliefs in the face of pressure. Perseverance, right there. Now, I'm not just talking about peer pressure, although there's something to be said about that. The ways in which peer pressure sort of makes us not actually say what we say. Maybe it's because we're trying to avoid a disagreement because we don't know how to disagree well. But that's part of the problem. But part of the problem is just How do you handle it when someone says, well, I have this argument and you think this, but I have this argument? How do you respond? When do you keep your belief? When do you not? Now, this is fun because this is kind of the exact opposite of what we were talking about last week, right? So last week, we were talking about, the possibility that you would be wrong. Today, we're talking about the possibility that you could be right. Now, I could easily bore you going on and on about sort of what your beliefs mean and how they work. But most philosophers would essentially agree that you would have certain fundamental beliefs, okay? Most of us have some sort of foundational beliefs. These beliefs kind of create your understanding of the world. They're how you view the world, and without them, you wouldn't really be you. Giving up on these beliefs too easily is going to kind of completely change who you are as a person. And to do that is to give more weight to the person you're arguing with than to yourself, all right? You're not taking your arguments as seriously as you're taking their arguments. Now, I'm not saying that you can't be wrong about fundamental things. I have been there before. It kind of feels like your chair is being pulled out from underneath of you. And I think that's another time to sort of recommend grace in disagreements, right? If someone sort of is completely changing their worldview, those disagreements they're going to be challenging, and the person's going to need, some patience in that way. Okay. Oops. Yes, sorry. Believe responsibly. This is important. We'll keep doing that one today. Okay, so you can think about intellectual fortitude as kind of like holding on to a rope. Okay, so intellectual firmness, this is a very similar virtue, which is why I'm talking about it. It's basically like how tight you hold the rope, right? So there's different things that matter if you're holding onto a rope. One is how long are you going to hold on? When do you decide to let go? When your hands are burning, when do you let go? And at what point do you, keep trying? So, to hold onto the rope, right? It's sort of, we have to figure out what to do with that. Intellectual firmness then is about the strength of the hold. How tightly should you maintain your beliefs? Certain beliefs, fundamental ones, should take more evidence to change your mind as to others. So if you told me that it was raining outside, I didn't think it was, I would just look outside, and if I saw the rain, I'd think, okay, great, you're right, it is raining outside. And I would change my belief like that. Now, if you told me that instead that we lived in a matrix, right, and everything I think is true is wrong, it's going to take a lot more than just looking at a window to convince me, right? It's going to take more evidence. So similarly, in intellectual fortitude, right, it's about how long you hold on. When do you let go? When do you keep holding on and maintain your belief? So think about, the rain, right? I'm looking out the window and you guys tell me that it's raining and I see water falling down. So I think, okay, it's raining. Now, it could be raining, or Justin could be standing outside with a hose trying to convince me that it is raining. Now, that's pretty unlikely. Like, why would he waste his time doing that? But it's still another example. It's still another way in which it could be raining. So I have to think about, so when I'm deciding what intellectual fortitude is, Justin says he's not much of a window washer. Yeah, he's not. So intellectual fortitude, right, is deciding when to hold on to your beliefs, even in the face of evidence that says, oh, it's raining outside. Now, on certain things, right, like if it's raining outside, it's very unlikely that Justin's going to be holding the hose, and I should probably just, let go of that belief pretty easily. But there are other things, like maybe my belief in God, that I'm going to hold on to longer and tighter. So you can think about basically any person who's kind of changed the world in a way. Let's see, Copernicus or Gandhi or MLK. These are all people who kind of changed the status quo and changed people's beliefs because they held on to their belief in the face of people saying, no, you're wrong. No, obviously, you're wrong. I'm going to give you guys another example of what intellectual fortitude is and what's the problems when you don't have it. I don't know how many of you have been lucky enough to see Hamilton lately. I wish I could say that I have, but I know the music by heart. Don't worry, I won't rap for you guys. In Hamilton, right, Aaron Burr is a perfect example of someone who lacks intellectual fortitude, right? Everywhere he goes, he changes his mind. He's willing to change his mind completely in order to get to the best, whatever he thinks would be successful in a particular situation. Now, his lack of intellectual fortitude isn't just about like if it's raining outside, right? He'll do it for like, should we fight in the Revolutionary War? Should I, ratify the U.S. Constitution? Everything. He's willing to give up on any of that. So later on, right, the very end of the play, I'm ruining it, kind of, Hamilton's two nemesis, Burr and Jefferson, are at each other's throat. They're both running for president. And the race is tied. So Hamilton has to sort of say who it is who he likes. He ends up saying, look, the country is facing a difficult choice, and I would much rather promote Jefferson. Jefferson has my vote. I've never agreed with Jefferson once, and we fought on 75 different fronts. But when all is said and all is done, Jefferson has beliefs and Burr has none. All right? So Hamilton believes that sort of lacking intellectual fortitude is so dangerous that he would rather have someone who he completely disagrees with as president than have someone who is not able to hold his beliefs and, would give up good beliefs in the name of compromise. So what is this going to look like in practice? Well, there's a couple different ways in which this would look. The first thing I would say is to think about compromises, right? We love compromises. This is the thing we teach all our children: compromise, compromise, compromise. And I would say, think long and hard before you enter any epistemic compromises. I know. I won't say that to any preschoolers. We like them. We think they're practical. But being practical isn't necessarily mean you are moving in the direction of the truth, okay? So with compromises, we sometimes end up having things that neither side believes, but we all accept it as truth just to sort of get to a solution that we can have. So take, for example, a really hotly debated topic in our culture, and one which I sort of used as a focus in my dissertation, which is abortion, all right? So some people believe that life begins at conception. And some people believe that a fetus becomes a person when it is viable and able to live outside the mother. Politically, we have come upon a compromise that we basically take these two different ideas and split them exactly down the middle. That's what we say politically is sort of the compromise we've come to. Now, neither side believes that at 20-some weeks is exactly when a fetus becomes a person in any way. Neither side thinks that. But that's what we've agreed on politically, because we aren't sort of able to stay with either side, right? So not that everything has to be about abortion, right? But thinking about in your own life, right? You might have some places where you've compromised with someone, but the compromise you came upon, though it's practical, has no epistemic grounding, okay? There's no reason for you to hold on to that belief. In the same way, there's no sort of scientific or theological reason to think that life begins at 20 weeks. That's just the compromise that we've come to. Another way to think about this is to think about the sort of beliefs that are most important to you. So given my field, I've had lots and lots of discussions with people about what it means to be a Christian. Does God exist, right? And I'm not going to lie, there's some really good arguments sort of to think about when we're thinking about, does God really exist on both sides? But no matter how many of these arguments and discussions I've been in, I have still maintained my belief in God. I haven't given that up. And frankly, I would be really surprised if someone else in several conversations with me suddenly changed their mind. All right. Some might say I'm acting irrational, but I'm not. I believe that my belief in God is truth-seeking. It's the truth. So I'm going to maintain that belief, even in the face of difficult arguments that say, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? Now, am I willing to hold on to all of my beliefs For dear life, no, definitely not. There's a lot of beliefs about which I know I have limitations, right? This is where intellectual humility comes in from last week. So there are some beliefs that I maybe would hold on to for a little while, but then it would take a little bit of evidence and I'd realize, okay, I can let go of those beliefs. To be intellectually humble, right, is to sort of be aware of what I know and what I don't know. This goes really closely with intellectual fortitude, because intellectual fortitude is all about knowing what you should know and what you should hold on to. So ideally, right, if it's something that you know you have limits on, you probably shouldn't hold on to that belief for dear life for a very long time, right? That should be the sort of thing where you let go of your grip a little bit quicker. Now, if it's something you're an expert on, then you probably can hold on to that belief and maintain it, hold the grip, hang on to the rope for a longer period of time. Now, together, intellectual humility and intellectual fortitude are going to give you the tools to evaluate cases of disagreement with accurate beliefs about yourself. There we go. So believing responsibly about yourself. You're going to have an accurate picture of yourself, not sort of a fictional view of what you think or don't think. Now, we haven't really talked yet about how to figure out which one you should have, right? When should you be humble and when should you hold on to your beliefs? This is something I promise we're going to get to, but unfortunately, it's not till the last week. We still have a little while to go, sort of building up our skills in order to figure out which one we use in which particular situation. So I think I went a little fast today, but here is some of your homework for this week. Okay, so first homework is I would like you guys to think about what is one of your fundamental beliefs, a belief that you would not give up on easily, right? So a belief that maybe you've even had disagreements with others about before, numerous times, but you hold on to that belief. And I'm curious, maybe you have expertise related to this field. Maybe that's why you're holding on to the belief. Or maybe you're aware that you don't have limitations in a certain way. Perhaps that's why. But what is one of your beliefs that you would hold on to and it would take a lot to convince you to let go of it? Another question I have for you is to think about any epistemic compromises, right? Any kind of compromises that you might have made and what it would have looked like if you had held your ground, right? What it would have looked like to have had intellectual fortitude in those times. Would you have been better at seeking the truth if you had held on to your belief rather than make the compromise? Finally, when you guys are arguing this week, I want you to go practice disagreeing again. I know, lots of fun. I want you to think about yourself. This week, we're going to include intellectual humility and intellectual fortitude, right? So are you fairly evaluating your limitations? Are you keeping an eye on what you know and you don't know? Are you giving up on any fundamental beliefs too easily? Are you letting go of beliefs when you really should be holding on to them for a longer period of time? Do your actions comport well with your evaluation of your limitations and your expertise, right? Are you acting in accordance with how you think your limitations are or what you should hold on to? Or are you acting sort of differently than that and you're not actually acting with intellectual humility or with intellectual fortitude? So, Justin, do you want me to keep rambling or would you like to jump in and we could do just a few extra minutes of questions?
No, Jewelle, I was actually wondering, could you go back to the homework slide and see if anybody else has shared anything and if there's anything else that you want to say about last week?
I would love to.
Just before we launch in, Jennifer DeLippi's already given us a great question to start with here.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. So here are some of the homework slides. Here's some more of what we thought. So People said they made an effort to look at the news from an opposing viewpoint. Wow, that's really challenging. I'm really impressed that you did this. Not giving up when you lose or don't yet understand. That's really important. That's kind of a type of intellectual fortitude in itself, is sort of holding on. Let's see, no problems. We both think we lose arguments to each other, but really Lisa wins. Of course, Lisa wins. I'm not surprised at all. And took a step back and just decided to find a place of love around the topic. I think that's probably your best move when dealing with many of these things, is to kind of take a step back. I know I said this last week in the questions, but I fully recommend taking lots of water breaks in the middle of disagreements, right? Lots of times to pause and think about, what do you think and how does that impact? How does that relate to this conversation?
Great, that's fantastic. Jewelle, could you stop sharing your screen, and we will we'll move to some Q&A here. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Dr. J for the teaching tonight, and thanks to all of you for your feedback on the homework. That was really interesting to me. That was partly a personal curiosity of mine. I wanted to see what the results were. So just a review here of how we'll do Q&A. If you would like to, you can put a question in the chat here on Zoom. That might be the easiest. You can also raise your hand, and I'm happy to unmute you, and you can ask your question over Zoom video. Happy to do that too. And so the way to do that is, if you're on a computer, click the participants button at the bottom of Zoom, and then up will come a list of all 44 of our participants, and there's a button there for you to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, I can see it and I can unmute you. You can also just leave a question in the chat. That's perfectly fine. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can leave a comment. I know that there's about a 60-second delay on Facebook Live, but I can see that I'm watching the comments there if somebody would like to chime in. Our first question comes from Jennifer, and thank you so much for Jennifer. I think it's a fabulous question. Really taken with it when you first posed it. It's about so Jennifer's saying that a belief doesn't necessarily have to be evidence driven. It can be aspirational, as it were. Thinking about an idea that we can always do better. Jewelle, you were mentioning the examples of Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, visionaries. Are there more examples of these sorts of visionary beliefs that maybe, as you would put it, they're so fundamental that you shouldn't compromise on them? I mean, it's not exactly like the I've been to the mountaintop speech that MLK gives. It's not exactly reality. It's a vision he's casting, but it's still fundamental to him. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. I'm really pleased that you ask it. So I think that there's a lot of things, right, when we're talking about disagreements that we got to keep in mind. I truly do think that being truth-seeking is a long-term enterprise, right? So to be truth-seeking means that maybe our generation may not get the truth. Maybe the generation after us may not get the truth, but we might be moving more in the direction of truth. And I think that that's sort of what I would think about if I thought about MLK or Gandhi, Copernicus, those sorts of persons who held on to their beliefs, and they may not got to realize their beliefs in their life. They're these sort of true beliefs, but some more realization has happened past them, and it's sort of an ongoing process of moving closer and closer towards the truth.
Thank you, Jewelle. Before we move on to another question, I just want to shout out here to Reverend Elizabeth's suggestion of the two popes as an example of two men acting with great intellectual fortitude but staying in conversation. The two popes being a dramatization of the relationship between Ratzinger and Bergoglio, better known as Popes Benedict XVI and Francis. Really wonderful example. Please do chime in here, share your questions with us in the chat, or on by making a comment in Facebook Live, or by raising your Zoom hand. Would love to hear from you. While people are formulating a question, Jewelle, I have a question, which is similar actually to the question Jennifer posed.
Mhm.
You were saying that one of the things that we need to evaluate when we're thinking about, okay, so I have this belief and I disagree with somebody about it, is not just how much we know about it, but how important that belief is to us, how fundamental it is to us. What are some signs that a belief is really fundamental to me? I mean, is it just that I get angry about it whenever somebody challenges me? Or, how do I know when a belief is really fundamental?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fabulous question. So some philosophers like to think about it in terms of kind of like gravity. Maybe you've seen, planets, they weigh down and everything kind of gets pulled to them by their weight. It's similar to fundamental beliefs, right? These are beliefs that end up impacting so many beliefs around them. So if you find that you're in a disagreement with someone, you might find that you're talking about something and maybe that thing itself is not actually like a fundamental belief, but is poking at something that is a fundamental belief, right? So we have lots of beliefs. I believe that I'm actually seeing you guys right now, that we are really in person. I believe God. I have all these sorts of things. And that causes me to have lots of other beliefs. And so holding on to those beliefs, not only will it make it sort of more emotional in those kind of conversations, but these are kind of beliefs that give oomph to all the other beliefs that we might have.
Yeah, thank you. And what advice do you have for somebody who's feeling the oomph of a fundamental belief being challenged? I mean, we have to determine if we're going to lean into our intellectual humility or intellectual fortitude with the thing. But I mean, how do you deal concretely with the fact that somebody disagrees with something that's so fundamental to you, it makes you feel like, oh, it's a punch to the gut?
Yes.
I mean, belief God is a great example, maybe, for people like me and you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is that's a really important question. There's a lot, to deal with it, both for yourself and for someone else, right? So in both situations, I think the number one thing I would suggest is having grace with yourself and with the person that you're in discussion with, right? So when you're going to have something that's challenging a fundamental belief, like you said, it's a kick in the gut. It hits you emotionally, and it means that it's very challenging to, in that moment, actually address sort of any of the issues, any of the evidence, anything that's happening in that moment. So that's the sort of situation where it's okay to maybe take a step back and say, okay, I feel really challenged by this. I'm not giving up on this. I'm not going to just throw in the towel and say, I don't want to look at this, talk about this anymore. But it's okay to give myself time to reflect and think about this and slowly, unwind it and see what it would mean and the implications for my life.
Totally. So I'm getting a couple of questions here, some of which are being sent to me privately in the chat, which is all good. If you want to send it an anonymous question, you can send it to me in a private message in the chat. All good. So a question here about how does the intellectual fortitude thing work when another person in, let's say, a political conversation is also holding on to their beliefs really strongly? I mean, if you just have fortitude on one side and fortitude on the other, what's the way forward? Political conversation is one example of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really excellent question. There are a lot of ways forward. There's a lot of ways back also. I think that in terms of the situation, if you really truly are holding to your belief and you feel like you need to, for evidence reasons, for aspirational, whatever the reasons are, and the other person does as well, that might be a time to put a pause in the conversation for a little while. Or that might be a time to sort of take a step further back, right, when you're discussing with this person and see what sort of underlying values are at play. Perhaps you guys have just fundamental different values, and that's going to cause this kind of contradiction to happen, and you're just going to continue contradicting. And so that might be an opportunity to ask more questions and try to figure out, okay, I'm holding this belief because I value these things. You're holding that because you value that. It doesn't mean that either of us are acting poorly as epistemic agents. We're still thinking rationally. We just have different things that we are putting priority on.
That's really interesting, because that's partly about figuring out what you're actually disagreeing about.
Yeah.
You might think the disagreement's at this level, but actually it's about this level.
Yes, I think that many political disagreements are any kind of disagreements, right? Ones you have with your family, friends. Sometimes the thing we think we're disagreeing about is not actually the thing we're disagreeing about. We have there's further these fundamental beliefs that are farther down that are actually at stake. And we just kind of have to take the time to unwind and to kind of dig deeper into those.
Yeah. I love Jill Sekulis' comment here that the degree of importance to the parties matters. And she's giving an example of, she says, Michael, reading this for the folks on Facebook Live, she says, Michael and I have a habit that when we reach an impasse, the person to whom the point is most important, quote unquote, wins. I mean, it's interesting because, I love it so much, in part because it speaks to what you're talking about with fundamental beliefs. How do you distinguish a belief being fundamental and a belief being important to you? Are those the same? Are all beliefs that are important to us, are they all fundamental beliefs, or you see what I'm asking?
Yes. I think there is a distinction between fundamental and important. It's a very narrow one, and it's one that is not always very easy to figure out, right? So some of these fundamental beliefs, I keep not wanting to use the word foundational because in philosophy that's like a very particular type of belief, but kind of foundational beliefs in a ways sort of impact all your other beliefs. It's like dominoes, right? You push one and you attack, you get to all the other beliefs. Sometimes things are important to us and they're just, they're much smaller things. Like I might just believe, that The Crown is a really good TV show and be willing to just like die on that hill because I'm just very certain that I'm right. And that might be very important to me and sort of how I'm thinking about the world. I think that there's a chance, right, if we keep digging down, we could find some sort of other value that's causing me to have this sort of like grip where I don't want to let go. But there also might just be something that, is important to me for maybe, less foundational reasons. And that can be okay too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Clearly The Crown is a wonderful TV show. I can't believe anybody would disagree. But anyway, so Father Peter here has chimed in with the Dave Mason song, which I think is fantastic. He's the man with the world's greatest playlists. Let's leave it alone because we can't see eye to eye. There ain't no good guy and there ain't no bad guy. There's only you and me, and we just disagreed. In that same vein, Jennifer Walsh has chimed in with the question, is it ever okay to throw in the towel? I mean, when are we supposed to sing like Dave Mason and just say there's only you and me?
Okay, yes. I think that there are many situations where it's okay to throw in the towel. I think a lot of it depends on who it is that you're talking with, right? So I would definitely recommend throwing in the towel very quickly on Facebook arguments. I would say throw in the towel. Quit easily because those probably are not very truth-seeking, at least in my experience. They have not been very truth-seeking. I think that if your person you were talking with is not willing to listen to you, not willing to sort of take some of the steps that you're taking, I think that might be a moment to kind of pause. I do think that there is some things you can do, some steps you can take to try to sort of prod them, right? Things we talked about last week, really asking them, what do you think? Why do you think this? Trying to find out more and more about what their belief is. But if they're being hostile and they're no longer sort of trying to get to the truth, it might be best for you as sort of an agent who wants to get to the truth to just say, okay, we agree to disagree and we cannot have a productive conversation about our disagreements right now. So we're going to have to just cut it off.
I think it strikes me, you're talking about, and a lot of our questions are around, what do I do when I'm in a situation where I'm trying to disagree well and the other person is not trying to disagree well, or is just not disagreeing well?
Yes, I think that's that's a hard thing right now, right? Is because we've gotten so bad as a society at disagreeing that we might all be amazing at it now, but it's hard to find someone to talk to who has the same values. I do think that you can try to, lay those sorts of things on the table and say, okay, look, I would really like to, get to the truth in this. And that means I'm going to take seriously what you're saying. And I want to, take serious my own limitations. But, you can't force another person to engage in that way. You can just kind of keep trying to make the conversation possible and safe for them. So they will, maybe safe, but challenging also for them, so that they will participate.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a lot actually to unpack just in the last sentence that you said.
Yes.
But I have a couple of other anonymous questions here.
Right.
One is whether you might speak to the role of intellectual fortitude in navigating what we might call like movements around misinformation or manipulation, conspiracy theories, etc. I mean, I think we have discourses on both just in our political discourse, on both the right and the left around fake news. Yeah. Both the right and the left are really concerned about fake news. They just think that different news organizations are the fake news bit, or they think that different people are responsible for the fake news, etc.
Right.
What do you, given how crucial truth is to your understanding of disagreement?
Yes.
Or how would you suggest we navigate those kinds of things right now?
Yes. That's a fabulous question. I think that many of the sorts of things that you're going to hear about on the news, online, even if it's from a source that you genuinely trust most of the time, I would hold with a loose grip. I would not hold on to that belief super tightly, not until, give it another week or two for more information to come out. I'm saying that mostly because we live in a world of misinformation, and because the information that makes the news is not always the most careful research, the most, thought out. It's the ones that's going to shock. It's the ones that's going to cause, people. I'm not saying all news organizations are like that. Obviously, there's some really talented ones out there. But generally speaking, like news, they want to get your attention. And so they want to get you emotional in some sort of way. And that is not necessarily going to keep you on track to just get to the truth. So I would say some of these things, anytime you hear a story that sounds a little conspiracy-ish, I know it's really tempting to want to believe it, because we all kind of want to believe that we know things better than everyone else is kind of, they're wrong. But we'll talk about that more in the next couple of weeks too. But for the most part, I would just hold on to it loosely and give yourself time to determine whether you should hold on to that belief tighter or not.
Thank you. Can you speak? So that's really, really interesting about the news, and some really great comments here from Jennifer and Lauren in the chat. What about conspiracy theories in particular? I'm interested in this. So let's take the example of the moon landing. Okay, let's say I'm in an argument with. I'll just say I think Apollo 11 was actually successful and they landed on the moon. But I know many people who are seriously convinced they did not. I don't know how fundamental my belief that Apollo 11 was a successful mission is exactly, but how, given the levels of intellectual fortitude on both sides of that, me and my moon denier interlocutor, how would we go about that? How do you work with conspiracy theories?
Yes. I think that you work with them with patience. All right. When people have kind of come to accept theories, it's because they believe that there's evidence that's being hidden. It's because they believe that the general public, i.e. probably you, are missing something important. And so I think patience is important. It's not one of those times to just throw evidence at them. I know that's very tempting, because when you receive so many things that are so false, you just want to, truth check them just over and over again. Like, is this right? Is this wrong? But in those cases, it might be better to start with asking questions. Why is it that you believe that the moon, that we didn't land on the moon? Where's the evidence that you came up for this? Why is this important to you? What is at stake in this conversation? Those sorts of questions. And take it slow so that you can at times say, okay, now you've stated this thing that's actually, here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it. Here's the evidence for why I believe it. And see if you can make the conversation actually happen.
Thank you so much. I have just one more question here. I know that we're out of time, but it's just so good. I have to ask it.
Okay.
One that you could spend 3 or 4 hours talking about. Okay, so truth seeking is really crucial to what you've been trying to share with us here.
Absolutely.
But what exactly is your understanding of truth? Can truth be different for different people? And if so, what difference is that? So how do you think about truth? Can it be different for different people?
Fabulous. Okay. I was hoping, I knew this question was come. I actually almost talked about it tonight, but then I was like, oh, wait. Truth is hard, right? I think that there is objective truth. I am just skeptical about whether or not everyone will actually be able to have access to it. So I think that there is truth in the world. I'm not certain that we all will always have access to it because of various different sort of our situation, our biases, all sorts of things, both positive and negative, can make it hard for us to get to truth. What does that mean practically speaking? Well, that means practically speaking, we're going to come up with some different sort of truths at times. And some of them might be easier to kind of shrug and be like, okay, I guess the dress is white or blue or gold or whatever color it is. And sometimes it might be more important to say, no, it is really foundational that we think that this belief, that this thing is really true and that it's true for everyone, and trying to engage in that conversation. But this is a great question, and we'll definitely have to talk about it more next week.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really glad that question was for you and not for me. And I know more conversation to be had around that. One thing here in our closing moments is that Reverend Elizabeth has compared the what's at stake question, this how fundamental is this to me? How fundamental is it to them? Where are we at? What's the level on which we're actually disagreeing? She's, you've recommended Jewelle patience and pausing and going for a walk, etc. She's compared that to the mindfulness pause, the meditation. Really, really, really wise. Very cool. Thank you so much, Dr. J, for tonight. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all so very much for being with us tonight. In addition, we will send out your homework that Dr. J was speaking about just a few moments ago. If you've been registered for this week's class, we'll get that email out to you in the next hour or so. Just a reminder, and for those of you who are on Facebook Live or who didn't register, the first question is, what is one of your fundamental beliefs, a belief on which you would not easily give up or you shouldn't? The second is, have you ever accepted any compromises, epistemic compromises in your beliefs where you actually should have held your ground? You actually should have stuck to your guns, as it were. And the third is, in your disagreements this week, at dinner time or otherwise, first, are you fairly evaluating your epistemic limitations? That's a question related to last week's discussion of intellectual humility. The second is, are you giving up actually on a fundamental belief too easily? And the third is, do your actions comport well with your evaluation of both your limitations and your expertise? So blessings on all of you. God bless you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.